You're listening to Accounted For, the Canadian podcast that explores the intangibles of every career. I'm your host, Daniel Lee. Hello, welcome back to Accounted For, the podcast that shares and inspires unconventional career journeys. Please help the podcast grow by telling your friends about it, sharing episodes that you think will benefit people in your life, rating it with 5 stars, or leaving a review on how it may have helped you in your own journey on iTunes and whatever listening app that you use. Today's conversation is a conversation with a return guest, Marc Champagne. Marc is the co-founder of Keough and host of Behind the Human podcast. In episode 46, we talked about Marc's journey of building Keough after a career in pharmaceuticals. In today's episode, we talk through the developments since the year, because I think the episode 46 came out June 2019, but we recorded it a little earlier than that, so we're close to about a year mark. We also talk about the process and reason behind shutting down Keough, the digital journaling app that had 86 million impressions and a community of about 200,000 users. We talk about the difference between app rankings and user metrics versus the actual economic reality of operating it. Spoiler alert, it's not what I assumed it would be. I thought his metrics would be good enough to have, I guess, a sustainable cash flow business, but it turns out it's a very expensive process to run an app. We talk about the difference between We also talk about the Marc's journey of building communities and how the podcast led to so much more than a personal brand. His new pursuit of consulting human-centric companies on brand strategy, and also his new venture of writing a book on mental fitness. Traditional media only touts the stories of exits for obscene financial numbers, but in our conversation today, we talk about the daily process of building something, the constant ups and downs, and the many iterations we will make in our journey to build something that is meaningful and fulfilling. I share my piece of the journey, the struggles I've had. I learned a ton from what Marc has gone through, and it's been an awesome conversation to have, and something that has definitely aided myself in going on my own journey as well. So, without further ado, here is my fun conversation with Marc. Hey everyone, welcome back to Accounted For. Today we have a bit of a special kind of episode, something I'm trying out, and it's a catch-up episode with the return guest, Marc Champagne. Hey Marc, thanks for coming back on the podcast, my friend.
Thank you, sir. Returning guest, that's exciting. Appreciate the opportunity.
No problem. Marc here, if you haven't listened to his story before, I recommend you first-time listeners to listen to his story at episode 46, which launched, I think it was June of 2019. So it's been nearly about a year, Marc, since we've chatted. And
wow.
Yeah, I remember the first time we talked about your journey of building Keough, the journaling app, as well as the wellness company itself. And I'm really excited to dig a little deeper into what's happened in the last year. So how should you start this, man? Yeah, so let's see, what's been the development of Keough? I think where should we start? I think one thing that really caught my eye was that you rebranded the podcast. You had a podcast for Keough itself, and now it's called the Being the Human podcast. So tell me about that. Let's start there.
Yeah, it's Behind the Human.
Behind the Human, sorry.
And I mean, there's a lot of context before just even to get into that. So I'll give a bit of an update.
Yeah.
In June of last year, then it would have been close to the time where we actually made the decision to pull Keough off the market. Keough was just for everyone listening that hasn't listened to the first episode, it was a digital journaling app that we were talking about. And I remember you and I jammed quite a bit on just mental fitness practices and journaling being a big one. And, the very short version of it, we reached about 86 million people in under 2 years with that app through Apple features, and then a ton of content collaborations and whatnot. But the next step was to hit delete from App Store because it just wasn't financially viable at that time. So in October of 2019, actually hit that delete button. Primarily, I've reflected a lot about it. I've talked about it a couple times on a couple of shows, and most recently, the first time in front of an actual audience, which was at Fuck Up Nights Toronto. And the key lessons from that journey was just that, we had a lot of hype and a lot of excitement and PR, and like I said, all of these different media impressions and things like that. But that didn't mean that the actual app was a business. And that's a tough one. I think a lot of people fall into those traps where it was exciting. We were collaborating with big brands like LinkedIn and Google and VaynerMedia and stuff like that. And those people were coming on the show and providing journaling questions or prompts and stuff like that. But it didn't mean that our app flows were dialed in to a point where we were converting. We had a lot of development challenges in terms of not having internal development. So that was always a bit of a struggle. So at the end of the day, I mean, we had a really strong marketing plan. We had a lot of great partners that were helping us out, but we struggled to keep up with actually building the product to where we wanted it to be from a quality standpoint, and reach the conclusion that financially we couldn't keep going down that path, or it was going to take. We didn't want to be naive to the fact that it was going to take at least another 12 months of even coming close to maybe breaking even. And that was just a guess on whether that would happen or not. So it was tough because when the decision was made, it would have been probably not too much longer after we talked, actually, because it was obviously it was pretty fresh, or I wouldn't have been talking about where we were at, or it would have been a different narrative. But we had just finished some really awesome user research. So it was one of the first times that we talked to users properly, and it wasn't just like solving originally my kind of scratch your own itch scenario, which is how the product came up in the first place. And, just our team going through what we were looking for in a digital journaling app. Sorry. So we had a pretty clear roadmap on where to go, but there was still many iterations on the product that we knew would have to take place before it would be somewhat predictable in terms of conversions. So yeah, so that's, I know it's a bit of a long-winded answer. Why'd you rebrand the podcast? Well, because Keough Conversations as a podcast didn't really make sense anymore. But there's still a lot of people following the show, and the idea of unpacking mental fitness practices and also the reflective questions shaping the lives of all these awesome people is still something personally that I'm passionate about and want to keep going. So that's why it's still up on the market. But Keough Conversations, has been retired.
Wow. And I think that's, I couldn't have asked for a better, I think, overview of what's been the development of Keough. And so that's crazy though. Like you've, correct me if I'm wrong, I heard 86 million people were reached with the app itself.
Yeah, I mean, those are
Holy.
eyeballs or media impressions. So you can think of that as like when you're in the airport walking past the bookstore and counting every person that looks at the magazine rack or something. This is just Apple's app store, but it's still just I want to be humble about it, but at the same time, like most people don't even have 1,000 downloads on an app, so for us, we were super grateful to have literally, I think the ones that we could count, there were about 150 or so individual country features through Apple, of like whether it was app of the day or new apps we love, or we would hit these lists, start a digital journal, all of that kind of PR. So we were super grateful for that because we weren't paying for any of that. We had some pretty big names, and think we had good content, and definitely at that time too, we were very design focused, and the app felt very, I think, Apple-ish in terms of like a look and feel and usability. So I think all of those, there's no magic answer to how to get an app feature in the store. It's I wish we knew that, but I think a lot of those factors contributed to those features.
And it just astounds me like how, you know, you've had all these great exposures, and it is a crowded market in itself too, right? There's a lot of different journaling apps. Like I have a number of friends who are telling me about how they all my software engineering friends who are like asking me, okay, so Dan, you journal. I think I'll build my own journaling app and put it out there. And it's something that, as the mental wellness, I guess, movement and the industry kind of picks up in pace, that a lot of people are so creating products, which I think is a good thing, into the market. But at the same time, it's really difficult to get noticed. And Keough has been getting noticed, like you said, but it just seems like there's a bit of a disconnect between what people on the outside probably assume and the kind of business economics of it all. From like what you tell me, where from the outside people might think, oh wow, like this is getting a lot of PR, it's getting a lot of attention. It must be some super successful company. They must be like raking in a ton of money, because
Yeah.
obviously that
Yeah, definitely not the
they're getting
case.
noticed. But it seems like there is a disconnect there. Like, could you share a little more about that? Like, what are like the realities, like the
Yeah.
economics of what it's actually like to run an app for it to like, be profitable?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question. And it's like anything in life. I mean, I think you need a balance of things. Like the flip side of it could have been we had this like knockout, really well researched or user research generated product that, you know, we were running like design sprints with awesome agencies and things like that, so that we were really testing every single feature of the app and understanding, you know, where people were going, where they're dropping. Like that could have been one approach, but then have no one know about it. So no marketing or no brand strategy, which would have been which I think a lot of apps fall. Like that's another way of failing. So it to me it always has to be some sort of balance, right? Our scale was tipped towards more of the obviously the reach and the collaborations and the brand strategy that was working really well. And I have no doubt that we would have got there from a product standpoint if we had unlimited cash flow. But the thing is, like, people don't realize, and I personally fall into this as well. Like, we're used to free things when it comes to apps, right? Um, like, just to give perspective, at the end we had about 200,000 people in terms of a community that had actually downloaded it and were using it. So, you know, not a crazy amount, but significant, obviously. I mean, just the Amazon server costs of that, it's like thousands and thousands of dollars per month.
Oh wow.
So, you know, it's not cheap to house data like that. And when you start thinking of, you know, people would be like, oh, I want to include more photos, or I'd really like to include videos in my journal entries. And I get that, but there's costs associated to that. Even, you know, even when we made the decision to shut the app down, we had a second really tough decision, because we weren't at the point in the roadmap where we had an export feature. So, as you know, like, we'd like to say, like good humans, we figured, well, we've got all these people using it. Some people have been using the app for almost 2 years. And, you know, you're not talking about just, you know, including your, I don't know, your favorite wines or your wine list. Like, there's some serious like personal thoughts and memories. I remember people writing in and like they documented the birth of their first child using the app. I mean, so heavy things, right? And here we are, we're about to shut the app down without any export feature and essentially all data gone. So we didn't do that. We took a month, I think over a month, and again, out of our own pocket, hacked something together. Most of the development team was off or not part of the team anymore, so we were really a skeleton staff. The export feature was not a pretty scene, but at least for people, it allowed them to get their data out so they could have it. But like, it's just, I'm just sharing that because from the the outside, and we received comments like this. It was like, oh, you're just trying to cash out. And I'm like, cash out? Like, we're still recovering financially from this, right? Like, it's all perspective. And I think, and one of the reasons why I'm really trying to share this story, not only from a mental fitness standpoint and what I had to go through to even get through deleting this, and some of the, going through my own journey and how these practices helped me, but then the flip side of like what it really takes to um, build something from scratch. It's hard, and there's a reason why 90+% of new businesses and ideas are failing, right? And I hate the word failing, because I mean, I don't see this, it succeeded in so many different ways. It failed financially, um, but there are so many great things that came out of this. But no one talks about these stories. You only hear of, you would have heard when we, closed a big round of funding, or you would have heard if we partnered with like Calm or Headspace or something like that. But you don't typically hear about, yeah, we got to shut it down, and here's why.
No, yeah, 100%. And like, I can't express enough how grateful I am that you are sharing that your story on here with myself and my audience also, because for me it's obviously very selfish, because as someone who's going through the journey, yeah, like I want to hear more of these stories, because it's kind of more like the reality, right? Like you've said the numbers where it's 90% of things sometimes end up having to get shut down, and I've had to shut down tons of projects. Some of them are still running, but some of them I end up killing them off earlier, and there are different magnitudes of everything. And like you said, like when you built Keough, it wasn't. I know of some other founders who, I'm not gonna name names, but who are kind of quote unquote mercenaries in their tactics. Like there are some founders I know who just wanted to make a huge exit right after Series A funding, and this
Yeah.
particular founder is just floundering, and she's like, "Well, we were not supposed to live for 3 years after Series A. Like, we shouldn't be going for Series B. I wanted to exit right after Series A, but I can't now, and so this company is just slowly just churning through investor money until they just don't exist anymore. But there's some people who just do this just to try to get some quick buck or trying to make a lot of money, but like you said, when you started Keough, you had a purposeful mission behind it. And I'm just curious on what you said about like the process. Like it when you first described it, you said, yeah, like it wasn't financially viable, so you had to delete it. But there's gotta be this long mental, this difficult journey of wrapping your head around that, to like the idea of, do I have to shut it down? Like, can't I just push it on a little more? Isn't there a way? Can you like walk me through that part of the journey, like when
Yeah.
how that process actually worked out for you?
Well, and this is where I feel super grateful, in the sense that, the essentially the very practice, or the very idea, which was digital journaling, that sent my world into a tailspin, was the very thing that actually pulled me out of that tailspin. So it was actually journaling after, or through the decision, I should say, to actually get to a point of clarity on what made the most sense based on everything that we knew at that time. And also, answering really tough questions for myself, like, do I want to continue financially and mentally? Like at that point, it was close to, it was over 3 years there. It was already, from a standpoint of like, just commenting on your, what you mentioned about, like, do we just keep pushing forward? I mean, we had already been pushing forward. Like, we were operating probably, I would say, you know from the time the decision was made to shut it down to when this started, was probably a good 6 to 12 months of operating in survival mode, and doing really everything possible month by month to make sure that our internal team was paid, which meant that, myself and my co-founder often were not in any capacity. And those funds weren't even coming from Keough. They were coming from another company that my co-founder was running, that was kind of helping fund this. So, we're milking another company dry, and still not seeing the longer term path here, right? So there's so many factors, and I think, every story, every situation is different, obviously, but I think it starts with going into an idea, or what you want to do with with a clear vision, right? Like it was never to, sure we wanted to be financially successful in the sense of the money that we could bring in, the more products we could release. And we weren't just trying to build an app, we were trying to build a mental fitness ecosystem and company. And that was product one of the whole vision. So from the beginning, it was clear in that sense. But I think where people get lost is just if you're going into it purely for a cash thing, that's a risky move. Like even right now, I mean, I'm in the process of writing a book about modern day reflection or journaling, and it'll be from the lens of a lot of the podcast guests that have been on the show, and just again showing how this stuff is accessible to everyone, and it's not stereotypically the type of people that are doing these things. But I'm not going into that trying to say, hey, I'm putting it out there, it's going to be a New York Times best-selling book, I'm going to be this like millionaire author, because that's great if something like that happens. But what I'm truly excited about, and what Keough taught me as well, is that fact that I just ordered 2 books on Amazon, and tonight I'm going to crush through them to figure out like the way to structure the book, or the way others are writing certain paragraphs, and how to put together your summary. As I'm talking to you, I'm looking at actually 3 books right now from publishers that are from past podcast guests. They're like the flimsy pre-release press copies. So, Chip Conley, Jake Knapp, there's Alex Benanian. Like these are all best-selling authors. So because of the Keough journey and the podcast and all that, like I can reach out to those people. So like that's where the magic is, right? And those are the things that are not as tangible, or that people see from the very beginning, that, oh, just because the app shut down, like these relationships are there and they were formed because of that journey. And I'm looking at writing the book in the same way. Like I get to learn how to do that. I've never written a book. And it's exciting, it's scary all at the same time. But I think going into a venture like that, whether it's a book or company or an idea, with the mindset of not having all these expectations, just sets you up for your own internal success.
Mm-hmm. And like I can honestly just I feel I can hear the kind of excitement in your voice, even just as we're like talking at this kind of new direction you're taking. And that makes me want to ask you, so what is it's like Keough continues, the mission behind it continues. It's just that the app was just one iteration, and you're just iterating over into something different. And I'm curious on what is that, like how did you kind of navigate this evolution process for you?
Yeah, well, I'm still in it, to be honest. I mean, I talked a little bit about that in this talk for fuck up nights, and someone asked something like that, like how did you manage the emotional stress of like getting through this whole decision process, but then like figuring out what to do next? And my answer was, well, how do I look right now? Because I'm still very much in the thick of it. I mean, I'm talking about the book as this super exciting thing, which it is, but it's an element. And the way I'm viewing the current path is that there are 3 kind of big buckets that I'm working on in 2020. One being the book, which is a complete wild card. We'll see where it goes in terms of like any type of financial success. But it could lead to other things down the road in more of a long-term plan, like speaking, things like that. There's the podcast, which also doesn't really pay any money, but it's the ultimate best business development and networking and selfishly learning, as you know, from all your guests. And it's like, someone asked me the other day about, okay, if you're a brand, like what do you get out of a podcast? And, my answer was, well, there's the typical things that obviously you have content, you can chop it up, you can go Gary Vee style and just like blast it out on social channels. But the thing that a lot of people don't talk about is the other aspect of a podcast is like when someone introduces you to another person and says, hey, you 2 guys should go, or girls should go have a coffee. I feel like you'd hit it off. And then you meet with that person, you're like, oh, it was a really great conversation. And then 4 months down the road, then it's like, man, I'm so glad I went and had that conversation. That's, to me, the real magic of what a podcast can do. And but you have to be patient for that, and you have to be okay with not seeing all these immediate benefits. So, that's bucket number 2 for me. I'll keep that going as long as I can. And the show, the show's fully booked for the next 3 months, so that's good. But then the one that, where I'm working to pay the bills and it's not there yet, like there's still a lot of transition from Keough, is I'm actually helping or working with brands either from a full brand strategy perspective, because that's actually my past work. Before starting Keough, I used to do that in the healthcare space. And then in terms of what worked with Keough really well was actually having a really solid integrated brand strategy. So I'm doing some freelance work with human-centered brands. So again, like everything for me revolves around a very similar mission to what Keough was in terms of helping people unlock their minds and helping people, whether it's social good or not for profits, things like that. So yeah, so the big bucket that is very unknown right now is how will this strategy work shape out? There's some really fun work that are clients I'm working with that seem promising, but who knows how long that'll last. I'm toying with the idea, and it seems to be getting quite a bit of interest, but just the concept of going even more granular on brand strategy and helping brands that want to launch a podcast, but to do it in a from a vision oriented state of mind. So don't just launch the podcast to interview people, but launch it in a way that it helps fuel your whole ecosystem as a brand. And how can your all the different elements of your brand also fuel into the podcast, for example? Because again, that's how our strategy worked really well. Like the podcast lived in the journaling app. And when you tapped on the questions that the guests were leaving me in the podcast, it fired up a new journal entry. So that's what I mean. Like there's ways to integrate that in, right? Or if you're a brand that's trying to bring on corporate clients for some reason, it's a hell of a lot easier to approach big brands to interview them for a podcast than to go in and say, hey, we want to bring our whole service offering to your company. You can warm them up a little bit more and have a real authentic conversation about a topic that makes sense for both of you. And then you're already networked in, for example. So there's like a lot of different ways that I think podcasts are just really starting to scratch the surface that don't include your typical advertising sponsor model. I really think that's a thing of the past. And it's really only for like the Joe Rogans or Tim Ferrisses of the world. It's the top, 1%. For everyone else, I think a podcast is really a tool to drive people to other places. And like I said, a good networking function as well.
Mm-hmm. No, it's super exciting to hear that kind of development. It's like it is the evolution where you're constantly using the pieces that worked and constantly iterating and trying to test out new hypotheses. And it's super exciting to hear that too, because that's also been the development of my own platform as well, as I'm trying to combat the problem of cash flow as well, and trying to figure out, okay, how can I make this work? How can I generate financial income to make this continue to something that can persist on doing?
Yeah, it's a real thing.
Yeah. And I back in 2019 of Q1, I toyed with the idea of, trying to live off of this platform of mine, and that just went completely against the joy of it all. Like it became extremely miserable. I started hating what I was doing, and I had to look through my journals and remember and reiterate to myself that this is supposed to be a 10-year journey. And so then that kind of changed the mindset for 2019 on how I built this out constantly while I pursued other projects. But as a podcast and as the platform itself has grown, Q1 of 2020 has brought upon these kind of different projects that I'm now focusing on. One actually being something similar to what you talked about, where it's actually starting a podcasting agency. And that kind of came about because while I was building the podcast, I'd get other people asking me, like, I'd had like an investment fund ask me to set up a podcast for them. I've had other entrepreneurs ask me about setting up podcasts, and
Yeah.
like you and I know the actual process of just setting one up it's just a lot of administrative work, and I didn't want to do any of that, so I just wrote up an instruction manual and sent it over to people and said, "Hey, here you go. Just follow this, and you can do it. It's really easy. Like, I took all this information for free, so I'm just gonna give it back out there."
Yeah.
And but it got me thinking about, well, I love having conversations, and it is a privilege to get to do this kind of stuff. But it's also something that I feel that if you don't enjoy having conversations, then it's hard to do. And that made me think about actually helping other organizations start something similar to what I've started with Accounted For, where we have more interview based, long form conversations where it's not like there are types of content out there that's very short form, 2 minute bites, 5 minute bites. But what I love are these long form conversations where we actually get to dig deeper into things, get a holistic picture, and trying to change people's mindset around this content having to be this big attention grabber, but something that's more of something where you sit down, it's you're like grabbing a coffee of someone and actually trying to engage with the person. And so that's
Yeah.
been one thing I've been focusing on and trying to. I'm still in the idea testing phase where I've been talking to some tech firms, professional service firms, and more now I'm gearing up to talk to some larger companies on testing that idea. But I'm also exploring the sponsorship model as well, like what you talked about with the old way with podcasts. It's got me thinking though about how could someone small like me, who actually has a very niche and specific audience, not really compete with Joe Rogan or Tim Ferriss, but create a different way of getting sponsorship. And that's just been something I've been toying with, and I've had a couple pitches in the past few weeks, and it's something I'm exploring. But I'd be curious with you on how, like you said, you had collaborations with Keough when it was a journaling app. I'm curious on that side, like when you first started collaborating, like how did it go? Like, did you approach it as if you wanted them to sponsor you, or did you purposely make it into a collaboration effort where both of you are just trying to help each other in some way? Like, what was the thinking process behind that?
Yeah. I mean, the whole strategy or the pitch to a lot of these companies or people behind the companies, more so, like if I think about the VaynerMedias and things like that, was that, or Lego or LinkedIn, was that, you know, a we have something to offer here. We're talking about mental fitness and the health of you and your team and whatnot. So we're gonna have some content on that. That content's gonna live in our platform, which at the time had millions of app impressions and, not millions of users, but still significant people coming through. So we're gonna put you, everything's gonna link out from that podcast. Or if we did, the other thing we did was partnerships with companies, or again, people, brands, specifically in topics. Like, one of the early ones was with an awesome photographer who has a pretty decent following, and she just provided prompts to help people if they were going to travel to some place unique, how they could experience that place from a different perspective. Like, what visually inspired you today, and just pushing people outside of the regular experience when it came to travel. But then everything linked out to her work as well. So it was always circular, and we weren't, maybe that's part of the reason that financially failed. We were never charging people to come on the platform for that, because we didn't feel like we were at this place where it was this massive, like millions of people every day coming in. But who knows? Maybe that was a bad move. But what it did allow for was more and more of these people to come on board, because like there wasn't much downside. And then as the ball started to roll, you get one person, you get one brand, and then you're able to leverage those names, and it just keeps going, right? And it's still how I book guests for the current show for Behind the Human. Like, it's only been significant, but it's only been about 150 interviews, 155 interviews now, I think, in the last 2 years. 40 of those were written up, so you won't see those on the podcast. But even with that small number, in the grand scheme of things, for the most part, if there's someone that I hear being interviewed on even Tim Ferriss's podcast or some of the bigger shows, usually I can message them on one of the social platforms, pick the one where there's the least amount of noise for them. And Instagram's great for this in the sense of seeing who they're following, seeing where the mutual connections are. And usually I can name drop at least 2 or 3 either people or brands, so that when I send a message, it's not Marc Champagne or Behind the Human trying to sell them to come on the show and talk about it. It's their friends have already been on it. So it's an instant credibility boost. I can't even remember your question, to be honest, anymore. I went on a massive tangent there.
No, that's all right. But it's fun. You see the beauty. I'm sure you realize too. The beauty of these conversations is that I find there's a lot of gems in the tangents. When you're telling me about how you get more and more people on, more and more interesting and fascinating people on your podcast with the mutual connections, etc. It's definitely something I've been utilizing as I constantly try to get more and more interesting people on mine as well. And it's nice to know that my strategy is something that you utilize as well. And for someone who's done practically double the amount of podcast interviews that I have, it's good to know that I'm somewhat following a method that seems to be working. So that's been very
I know
helpful.
it works. I mean, I encourage people too. Jordan Harbinger, who's a huge podcaster as well, and that's his full-time gig. He has a free networking course, which is really all on this. And ironically, I mean, I signed up for it just to see what it was all about. But ironically, I got him on the show with that very strategy. It was the same thing. Like, he was being interviewed by Cal Fussman at one point, and I was listening to that. Then I was able to reach out and name drop Cal Fussman, who had just interviewed him. So like immediately, right? I think there's a timing thing there too, right? And this happened with Chase Jarvis as well, but it was years of sharing, in that case, his content. But like, there's a timing thing. Like, so if it's not just a matter of reaching out to anyone, like there's a certain authenticity there. Like, in that case, in the Jordan Harbinger case, I listened, like I heard the interview. I could feel that for me, I would want to go a little deeper in a certain area, which doesn't match Cal Fussman's show. And so there was like a true want there. And then it was fresh. He had just did it. I emailed him, like, his email's out there. It's not hidden. It's on his website. I put in the right people because of the past interviews. And actually, in that case, I'm pretty sure he replied and said, yeah, happy to visit that, but it'll have to be in like 8 months or something like that. So I just set a reminder, and then eventually came back and he came on the show. It was a great chat. But it's just, I think the key there is, again, that it's an authentic message. It wasn't just to get him on the show because he's a huge podcast name. Like, it came from a real place. And then you have to act and actually do something and reach out. Because like, what's the worst that can happen is either they say no or there's no reply. And even in that case, to me, it's a bit of a temporary. You just try again, or try a different channel. If it's not email, it's social. There's so many different ways. Like, that's the beauty of this like hyper connected world that we're in now. There's a ton of drawbacks, but there's a lot of positives. Like, I never in a million years would I imagine having conversations with a lot of these people. And again, this is why I'm, as hard as it was to shut down that app, and as much as I, personally wanted to keep it going, like, that journey has brought me to where I'm at. And I feel very connected to the work that I'm doing, even though it's still very unclear, but it feels right. The podcast feels right. The book feels right. Working with human-centered brands feels right. And there's certain trust in that path. And a lot of that trust has come out from a lot of journaling, which all came from powerful questions from the podcast. So, it's just one big circular setup that without that experience, I have no idea where I'd be at. Not here, that's for sure.
I have a lot of questions, and so I'm just gonna name off about 2 to 3, and then we can, just as a reminder for myself, just say it out loud, and then I'd love to revisit it after each one. But the three things that come to my mind, like the one thing is the community aspect, like the idea of being active in creating not just your own community, but actually giving back to some form of community. Like you've built a community with Keough, and it just seems like the way I'm thinking about it too is with podcasting is it's all like in one way it's like a network, but in also another way you're just contributing to a community. You're building your own community of people, like your own tribe, and I definitely love to hear about how you think about that. And then the second thought I had was just getting comfortable with like no or getting comfortable and not knowing with absolute certainty, but with a certain amount of certainty that what you're doing is the right thing, because that's something that's been a long journey for me. And so we can get to that one a little
Yeah,
later,
yeah,
but I just want to say it out loud just so we both kind of have it in the back of our minds. So I want to
sure.
first focus on the community part. Like, how do you think about that? Like, I love the part where you talked about it is you got to be authentic when you reach out to people. Like, I don't reach out to people to come on the podcast unless I'm actually excited to talk to them. Like, regardless of whether they're a big name or not, it's just you want to do it for the conversation, to actually get to know the person, to learn. But even when you're
Yeah.
giving back to the community, like how do you think about that? How has that evolved from what you first thought and like how you think about it now?
Well, and I just want to be I want to be authentic too. Like I'm human. I've done it before where someone came up, maybe it's through social media or something, or popped up on my radar, and I'm like, oh, they're doing some pretty cool things. They've got a huge social following. Let me try to get them on the show type thing. And it's happened a couple times where they've accepted. We've had the interview, and it's just not. I don't want to say it's not a good interview. Like it's, I think, because I've never put anything out that I wasn't proud to share, but I know in my, core that it could have been a hell of a lot better if it was someone that like I was truly passionate about reaching out, and I reached out for the right reasons. So, it's happened a couple times, and I sometimes catch myself going into that cycle, seeing, oh wow, and you look at the numbers, right, and things like that, and I'm like, no, like I've been down that path. It may seem attractive from the beginning, or the onset, but it doesn't lead to an authentic conversation, and B, to answer your question, it doesn't lead to providing your audience with um, what they have signed up for. I mean, people are listening to the show because they've given us the attention, and like that's not something to play around with, in my opinion. It's something there's hundreds of thousands of podcasts out there. They can be listening to really anything or doing anything else but listening to this show. So for me, that's always in the back of my mind if something like that ever comes up. But I want to be transparent too. Like it happens. I'm a human being. So I think again, it boils back down to figuring out for you, or for me at least, it's, for 2020, like what am I working on? I mean, there's definitely going to be more authors on the show because I'm working on this book, or even if they're not authors, there's a few more questions maybe related to that. And that's very much like a Tim Ferriss approach. Like most of the people he's interviewing or the questions he's answering are in relation to things he's trying to figure out, which also is a result of a lot of his books. And that may on the surface seem selfish, but again, it is. Sure, it is in one capacity because you're trying to learn, but it's not in the sense that you're actually asking the questions for a reason. And there's for sure other people out there that are probably wondering about the same thing. So I think it really boils down to that. It doesn't matter what platform you're using or where you're trying to build a community. I've been a little bit more active on LinkedIn these days. I feel like since their upgrades or their changes the last couple of years, it's just easier to engage in a little bit more of an authentic way without having to buy ads and things like that. And I follow like a core group of people that I'm trying to learn from, and I actually comment on their posts and whatnot. And that's led to a lot of different, really nice relationships or like reach outs coming this way. And again, just being true, but being true to myself. If someone reaches out to come on the podcast, which happens um, more often than I would have thought, to be honest, I have to put a filter. Like, do I need another um, like a motivational speaker or coach or something like that? Like, is that, I'm trying to think of A, what I'm trying to learn, but B, what the audience has already heard, and maybe the answer is no, or maybe it's not right now, for example, because now and it's like, it's a good problem to have, but like as we speak, there's I think 5 or 6 episodes already recorded, waiting to go out, and another 6 people booked. So there's volume there, so it has to be the right people that are coming on. For me, in terms of the objective of Behind the Human, and that's just to provide a very diverse view of the different wellness practices and mental fitness practices that people are doing. And it would get boring if I just had the same people or just had yoga instructors on nonstop type thing.
Yeah.
So yeah.
No, that's
Your second question, no, that's a bit of a loaded, a bigger one. When do you know, or how do you know when you're doing the right work or you're going down the right path? Something, I think, here's how I'd answer that, because before starting Keough, I wasn't in a situation, I think I shared this on your show in the first episode, but I wasn't in a situation where I was going into a job that I hated. So it was from a different perspective or a different lens that I was leaving that job because I knew I'd have regret not trying this new idea. And I could always go back, even though I'm not going back, because the journey itself has kind of evolved me to, that's not where I want to be. So again, I'm grateful for that. But I think what's key is that to land in an area where you're doing work that you really feel like, you should be doing this stuff, which I truly feel that now. And that's why I'm sharing this path. But I had to go through the last 4 years to do that. So you have to try things. And even while going through and like the certain channels that, even the podcast stuff that I shared, like the brand strategy stuff, like I know that I'm working with the right people or in the right space when people just start showing up almost naturally. Introductions are being made without me asking, or it happened yesterday. I was literally walking down the street to go get a haircut, of all places, and there was a guy in the restaurant in the window waving that I've been waiting to see, type thing. Like things like that, I believe in that stuff. Like things like that happen, and after the haircut, we had a great chat and caught up, and like there's other things now moving forward. So I think when people start showing up, here's the last, like when things start becoming a little bit more easy or seem like they're becoming fluid, or you're in a flow state of some sort, and people, opportunities, and things are being presented in front of you, it's usually a good sign that you're going down the right path. If it's always just hard and you're always just hitting your head against the wall and it seems impossible, might not be doing the right thing. That's hard.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's like you said, where it's constantly, it seems like, listening to your body and listening to your mind, listening to yourself.
Yeah, seeing the signs.
Yeah, and trying to be open to that. And yeah, it's something that like I'm close to hitting my own 2-year mark of taking on this journey, which happened 2018 of March. And I now tell my friends when I catch up with them that now I'm feeling a little, like, I'm actually feeling pretty comfortable about what I'm doing. Like the doubt and stuff sometimes still creeps in. The imposter syndrome lately has been creeping in a little as I start like pitching my platform and for partnerships to companies.
Mm-hmm.
But I've actually started feeling good about what I'm doing and not feeling as strained about not having a job or having like the stability of financial income. Like it's weird. It's really weird like that. Like it's been difficult to explain to friends how going without income, like a steady flow of income for 2 years, has made me really comfortable with not getting a stable income. But that's just
Well,
how
yeah.
it's been, and it's been
I think it
really,
changes your perspective, right?
yeah.
On income and money. And someone asked me that question. It's the same thing. Um, as before this whole journey, like things were pretty good. Like I was hitting some good financial goals, and from a materialistic standpoint, felt pretty good. Um, and the last few years have been really tough from that perspective. But and the reason I'm bringing this up, because I feel like you're in the same place. Like you put there's a bit of a different label, or a different appreciation, I should say, to what you do have. Like you're sitting in a soundproof booth with a microphone that is not accessible to most of the people in the world, and it's not like you're using crazy studio grade like recording artist stuff, and I'm on the same mic as you, and like with great headphones. Like my point being is, we always want more, we always want the best stuff, but there's so many people out there that just don't have access to any of these things, right? So when it comes to the craft, it's like, be super grateful for what we have, and that we can even have these conversations, and that the power didn't go out while we're having this podcast chat, or the internet's actually strong. Like that's not the majority of the world.
No, yeah, 100%. And kind of chiming off of that, it's kind of changed. It's definitely changed my mindset around the fact that, like, you and I, this the environment you just talked about. Like, there is that privilege that we have, for being in this kind of world. Like for me, having a family immigrate here and giving me these opportunities, and it's it's like I have this opportunity, so why wouldn't I try to make the best of it and try to do something different and do more, so I can help like more people who might be in similar shoes, might not be in similar shoes, but it kind of changes how I start looking at things with what I have. And yeah, it's been a very comforting thing to realize, but at the same time, it's also just been like a very surreal experience. I'm not very good at putting it to words, but it's been good to sum it up.
Yeah, I mean, it's good, it's hard, it's just the journey. It's where the magic is.
Yeah,
I think I think it's really that, like, and it's easier said than done, but as soon as you can shift into the value is actually, and it sounds cliche, but the value is actually this conversation, and then the next, and then the process of figuring out the best way to record it, all of that. It's not hitting the top 100 Apple Podcasts list. I mean, that's awesome. That's a great, yes, like I feel, thank you for that. But that's going to happen. That's going to come. That's going to go. What's not going to come and go is everything that you've learned and everything we're experiencing from having an actual conversation when it
yeah,
comes to the podcast world. And you can link that to everything. Like I kind of mentioned that with the book idea, right? Like I, I will come. I've already come. Even if I stop the process now, I've already learned so much just trying to figure out how to even start writing a book, and how to organize that, and like what does it entail. It's already helping in other areas of my life. So, and I'm just at the beginning. So, it's not the massive financial goals or the bestseller lists and stuff. It really is that process. And you hear this over and over again. And I used to hear it all the time too, and be like, yeah, it sounds really cool, but you don't it until you're in it and actually you yourself mentally like flip that switch. It's hard to relate,
oh
right?
yeah,
Because you hear people
100%.
all the time.
Yeah, it's like the
It's not
difference.
new.
Yeah, it's like the difference between you understand the rational argument behind something, but you just don't actually tangibly get it, I think, until you do
Yeah,
something. It's like I read all the mistakes you shouldn't make from like books, and then I'll still make the same mistakes, and I'll go, oh, now I get it. That's
yeah,
what they were
exactly.
talking about. Got it.
Yeah,
It's just I'm a little more prepared in handling it, maybe like after I've made the mistake, since I've read the books. But
exactly.
yeah, and speaking of books, I can't believe I haven't asked you this yet. Is how do you decide to start writing a book? That's an entirely different journey on its own. And the few authors I've got to interview on my podcast, the I think what's that? The crowded wisdom is that it's not an easy process. There's no glory behind it, and it's just so difficult. And so, what was the process like to kind of arrive at that decision that you said, you know what, I'm gonna write a book?
No, that's a good question. It I kind of fought it for a while, to be honest, because what was happening, as things were, well, actually, Keough was still running, and it started to get to the point where people were like, "Oh, I should really write a book about just like the different perspective on what mental fitness is, and specifically when it comes to journaling and just showing how people can integrate this into their lives." So it kept coming up, and there's definitely no time to even consider that while working specifically on Keough. Then when we shut it down, again, came up a few more times, like, wow, like you have all these questions. And I mean, every podcast interview I do, I'm at least coming out with 3 journaling prompts from the guests. So, there's hundreds at this point that are basically cataloged, and they're starting to become theme based, for designers or writers or executives. And it's starting to get interesting, and there's themes developing and whatnot. So it just, I guess, to answer your question, I almost couldn't not write the book or start the process, because it kept coming up. Like I said before, I'm big into following the signs. The idea of learning how to do it was really intriguing. I mean, it's always, you've interviewed authors. It's always fun to, pick apart like the process and, why they're writing it or how they wrote it and things like that. What were the routines and whatnot. So yeah, it just from an intuitive stance, it just felt right to do it. And I also think from a timing perspective, it's at a point in at least our society or history that I feel like a lot of people can use this. And I'm not setting it up as another templated journal. I'm not even sure if I'm going to use the word journal on the book title. It might just be related to reflection, because that's all it is. And I'm just trying to demystify again what journaling is, right? Like, you have a definition of it, I have a definition of it, but it's really, at the end of the day, people asking themselves questions and thinking, whether that's pen to paper or an app, audio, video, walking, it doesn't matter. It's the act of reflection. So yeah, I feel a bit compelled to just get it out there and see what happens and see where that takes the journey next. It's been fun, a bit scary, to try to figure out, how to do this, or at least, to your point, like, have enough knowledge to try to mitigate some of the risks or not make all the same mistakes that others have made, but still use a bit of a unique flair on even how, we launched an app, for example, and leveraged the podcast, things like that. So yeah, it just came out purely out of hearing it over and over again and feeling that it was a good time to just dive into it.
Wow. And are you self-publishing it yourself?
Yeah, so here's, like, this is a great use case. So I don't know yet. I'm leaning towards self-publishing. But this is the thing that's exciting. Like, the research I'm doing is all around that, and trying to find the different perspectives from people that have self-published to people that went down the big publishing route. And it all comes back to questions. Like, they're all leaving questions. Like, a lot of people, a publisher is like purely, and this is not a bad thing, but it's like it's a goal. They want, like Penguin Random House or Harper Collins, like, on their book. And that's like a life dream of some sort. So is that for me? Not necessarily. Or is it, are you doing it to get the work out and you want to help spin up a speaking career? There's pros and cons to self-publishing versus a big publisher. I mean, first of all, to get your book accepted by a big publisher is a task on itself. The reason why I'm thinking of leaning away from it is that time-wise too, it's going to take a hell of a lot more time to get it done. You still have to do all your own marketing for the most part. You do have access to distribution and editors and things like that, obviously. So it's like anything in life, there's pros and cons, but I'm in the current stage of cleaning up an outline and starting to fill out those chapter headings, starting to review past podcasts, interviews, and pulling out the nuggets that I want to kind of profile in the book, and ordering books on Kindle and Amazon, stuff like that, to see whether I should self-publish or not. I mean, right before we got on the line, I was interviewing JT McCormick, who is the CEO of Scribe Media, which is a self-publishing service. Actually, it's like Tucker Max's company. It's it used to be Book in the Box. So I was asking him questions about these type of things. They published David Goggins' book, for example.
Wow.
So I'm doing the research, essentially. We'll see.
That sounds exciting.
But it's gonna be out. That I'm committing to.
Awesome. All right. I'll look forward to that. And maybe if I ever decide to write a book, I'll get the wisdom out of you.
Absolutely. Happy to share.
Well, Mark, I know we're kind of at the end of our time runway, but this was so much fun. And I really appreciate you coming on the podcast and sharing the new development of your fascinating journey with myself and my audience. At least on a personal note, it's been super enjoyable and enlightening in one way to hear the development that you've gone through. And it's definitely gotten me thinking more about my own journey. And it's also made me a little more thoughtful about it too. So I appreciate it.
Yeah, right back at you. I mean, it's fun to watch. It's fun that this is a round two, and that again, statistically speaking, most people don't have a round two because their podcast is deleted. So, be grateful and I think appreciative of that, and I am too, to have this honor. And yeah, just keep asking yourself some powerful questions, because the better the questions, the better the outcomes. And I know you're pretty big on reflection, so keep rocking.
All right, appreciate it, my friend. All the best.
All right, take care.
Okay, bye. All right, thank you for listening to the podcast. I hope the story was inspiring to you. Hopefully it also helped you expand your perspectives. Hopefully it also made you question the default path that you might have been going on, or the default beliefs you might have had. And maybe now it'll make you even think about doing something about it, doing something different, maybe challenging yourself, being courageous. Who knows? But regardless, I'm really happy that you took some time out of your day to listen to this fantastic story with my guest. And if you would like to somehow, in some way, contribute and help support the podcast, and maybe even just be part of the community that I'm trying to build with the greater OMD Ventures platform, really think about being a stakeholder in the platform. And the quick way to do that is to go to my website, oldmandan.com, and go to the stakeholders page. I believe it's oldmandan.com/stakeholder. And the link is also down below. And that's how you can figure out how you can subscribe, follow to get more updates on the free content. But at the same time, also donate. And donate by actually just buying me a coffee. That's just how I put it. And you can buy me a coffee a month, coffee a week, or coffee every day of the year. And think about it as the way that, if you wanted to chat with me, you might just bring me out for coffee and buy me a coffee. Or if you wanted to bring one of my guests out to chat, you might buy them a coffee. So just think of it as I'm the service that's doing that for you, so you can just pay me in coffees. Don't worry, everything will still be free. It would just really help if you would like to show your support this way, so that I can use the coffee money to buy myself actual coffees, and also to buy my guests actual coffees, and use the leftover money to actually grow the platform, as well as even keep it operationally alive as well, because all this isn't really free, and it does take a lot of time to build it as well as operate it and hopefully grow it further. So your support would be amazing if you would like to contribute. And so just check out the website, go to the stakeholders page, and read the different kind of benefits you might even get as a stakeholder. All right, thank you.